What would you do if your own son threw you out on the street? I'm not talking about a neighbor's story, not something I read in the newspaper. I'm talking about my life. Yes, you heard me right. My very own son, the child I carried. For 9 months, the boy I nursed, fed, and raised with every ounce of my strength, one day looked me in the eye and told me to leave. And where was my husband? The man I had trusted, depended on? He was miles away, working in another city, trying to provide for us. He had no idea that back home, the woman he called his wife and the younger son who still needed him were being betrayed by the very person he thought he could rely on. I can still remember that day, the sting of those words, the door closing behind me, the weight of humiliation heavier than the bag in my hand. I thought nothing in this world could break a mother's heart more than losing her husband. But I was wrong. Being betrayed by your own child, that's a wound that never fully heals. But before you think this is just a story of pain, let me tell you something. That day, when my son threw me out, I thought my life was over. What I didn't know was that it was only the beginning. The beginning of my fight, the beginning of a new chapter where I would fall, I would cry, but I would also rise, and rise I did. So if you're listening today, don't just hear my words as a mother who suffered. Hear them as a woman who refused to let betrayal be the end of her story. Because if I could rebuild at 57, after losing everything, maybe you can too. So tell me, my friends, from which part of my story are you listening right now? Have you felt the pain of betrayal yet, or the spark of the rise that's coming? I want to know how far my story has reached you. And if my words touch even a small corner of your heart, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because I have so much more to share, and I want you with me for every step of this journey. My name is Margaret Miller, and today I am 57 years old. If you walk down a busy street in Kansas City, you might hear people calling me Mama Maggie. They'll tell you I run one of the coziest little restaurants in town. They'll talk about the way the smell of fresh bread drifts out onto the sidewalk, or how the stew I make tastes like something their grandmother once cooked. To strangers, I am a woman who made it. A woman who built something with her own 2 hands. A woman who smiles at her customers as though life has only been kind. But here's the truth most of them don't know. Behind every plate of food, behind every smile, there is a story of betrayal, of tears cried in silence, of nights when I thought tomorrow would never come. When people see me now, they see strength. What they don't see is the cost of that strength. They don't see the days I scrubbed other people's floors just to feed my son. They don't see the nights I went to bed hungry so he could eat. They don't see the years I searched for. My husband, praying that one day we'd be together again. Yes, I am strong today. But strength does not come cheap. Mine was paid for with heartbreak, humiliation, and loss. And before I became Mama Maggie, I was just Margaret, a 37-year-old. Woman who believed family meant forever, until the day I learned it didn't. When I think back to those days, I see myself at 37 years old, living in a small farmhouse on the outskirts of Greenville, Mississippi. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, creaky wooden floors, a kitchen that always smelled of biscuits, and strong coffee. But it was home. My mornings began with the sound of the rooster outside, the rattle of the old screen door when my boys ran out barefoot, chasing each other through the fields. Richard, my eldest, was already showing signs of pride, always trying to act like the man of the house. Michael, my youngest, had softer eyes, the kind that always looked for mine, as if to ask, "Mama, are we okay?" We didn't have riches, but we had love, or so I thought. The air in Greenville was heavy with the scent of earth after the rains, and our evenings were lit by fireflies that danced like tiny lanterns outside the windows. Simple days, but to me, they were enough. Then came the day Thomas, my husband, sat me down at the kitchen table. I can still see the worn-out oilcloth under his hands, the way he couldn't quite look me in the eyes. "Margaret," he said, his voice low but steady, "I've been offered work in Chicago. Real work. Better money. If I go, maybe we can finally give the boys a future." I wanted to be brave, to smile and nod, but my heart clenched. The thought of him leaving, of carrying the weight of the house and children alone, filled me with fear. Yet what choice did I have? A wife supports her husband, doesn't she? So I swallowed my tears, put on a smile, and told him to go. Go and build that better future for us. I didn't know then that his leaving would change everything, that the man I was letting walk out the door was not only stepping into another city, but also stepping into years of distance, silence, and a pain that would reshape my life. At first, Thomas kept his word. Every month a letter arrived, his handwriting slanted and hurried, sometimes smudged with the sweat of long hours. I can still hear Michael's little voice shouting, "Mama, the letter's here!" as he ran down the dirt road from the mailbox, waving the envelope in the air. I would hold those letters to my chest for a moment before opening them, breathing in the faint smell of the city that clung to the paper. Inside, Thomas would write things like, "Maggie, the work is hard, but I'm holding on. I miss your cooking. I miss Michael's laugh. Tell Richard he's the man of the house now." And tucked inside would be a folded bill or two, sometimes more when overtime was good. Those envelopes felt like lifelines, proof that even though he was far away, Thomas still carried us in his heart. It became Richard's job to collect the money. He was the eldest after all, and Thomas had told him to look after the family. I trusted him, believed in him. When he handed me the cash, I'd stretch it as far as I could. Flour, sugar, a bit of meat from the butcher. Some weeks were thin, but the promise of tomorrow kept me going. I clung to those letters. I would read them aloud by lamplight, my voice trembling, while Michael leaned against me, eyes wide, as if the words themselves were a bridge carrying us closer to his father. Those were the days when hope still lived in my chest. I believed that one day we'd all sit together again at the same table, stronger and happier, and that the sacrifices we were making now would lead to a future worth waiting for. I didn't know how quickly that promise would be shattered. It was during one of those summers, when the air in Greenville grew so heavy it felt like it could crush your chest, that Richard brought Pamela home for the first time. She was pretty, I won't deny that. Tall, with hair neatly pinned back, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She shook my hand politely, but her grip was stiff, calculated, as if even that simple gesture had been measured and rehearsed. At first, I tried to welcome her. After all, what mother doesn't want her son to find love? I cooked her favorite meals when she visited, listened when she spoke about the shops she liked in town, even offered her one of my quilts for the cold nights. But Pamela was not like us. She carried herself as though our modest farmhouse was too small, too simple for her taste. I began to notice the little things. The way she rolled her eyes when I asked Richard to chop wood. The way she whispered in his ear and then looked at me with a smile that felt more like a challenge. One evening after supper, I caught her words as clear as day. "Richard, you can't always let your mother make the decisions. You're not a child anymore. You have your own family to think about now." Her voice was sugar-coated, but her meaning was sharp as glass. From then on, the changes came slowly, like rust creeping over metal. Richard started handing me less money each month, saying there were other expenses. He grew impatient when Michael asked him about their father's letters. He spent more evenings in town with Pamela, less time at home with us. And Pamela. She became bolder. She would walk around the farmhouse like it already belonged to her, moving things, criticizing the way I did chores. Once, I overheard her laugh to Richard. "Your mama still hangs on to every penny like it's gold. One day, you'll see how much better life is when we stop living like this." Her words sliced through me. It wasn't just her tone. It was the way. Richard nodded, silent, not defending me, not even looking ashamed. That was when I realized Pamela wasn't just entering our lives. She was planting something poisonous in the soil of my family, something that would grow until it tore us apart. It was a quiet evening when Richard came home, his face darker than usual, Pamela close behind him. He dropped his coat over the chair and said it as if it were nothing. "Dad has stopped sending money." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" "He writes every month." Richard shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Well, he doesn't anymore. Times must be tough in Chicago. You'll have to manage without it." My hands tightened around the dish towel I was holding. Something in me resisted his words. I wanted to ask, "How do you know? Did you read his letters? Did you even ask him?" But then Pamela stepped forward, her voice soft but cutting. "Richard has enough on his shoulders, Mrs. Miller. You can't expect him to carry everyone forever." The way she called me Mrs. Miller, not Mama, not even Mother, sent a chill down my spine. That night, I lay awake listening to Michael's small voice from the cot beside me. "But Mama, didn't Dad say he'd always send money? Didn't he promise?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, stroking his hair. "Yes, baby, he did." But inside, doubt and fear wrestled in my chest. Was Richard lying to me? Or had something really happened to Thomas? My heart wanted to believe my husband was still sending help, but my eyes told me Richard's pockets were fuller, Pamela's dresses finer, while my kitchen shelves grew emptier by the week. It was the first lie, or at least the first I let myself see. And once a lie enters a home, it doesn't stay small, it grows. I will never forget that day. Pamela's voice was the first thing I heard that morning, low, sharp, carrying through the thin walls of the farmhouse. I didn't want to listen, but her words came anyway, like a poison carried by the wind. "Richard, your mother is holding you back. She's wasting the money your father sends. She'll never let us live our own life. If you want a future, you have to choose between her and me." Her voice dripped with false sweetness, but every word was a dagger. I prayed Richard would answer with the voice of the boy I raised, the boy who once held my hand when we crossed the road. But the silence that followed was heavier than any words. By afternoon, Richard came to me. He didn't look like my son anymore. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold. Pamela stood just behind him, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin smile. "Mama," he said flatly, "you and Michael, you can't stay here anymore." The room spun. "What are you saying?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "It's time you moved on. Pamela and I need this house for ourselves. You'll manage somehow." I looked at him, searching his face for a trace of shame, a flicker of regret. There was nothing. Michael clung to my skirt, his small hands trembling. "Richard, she's your mama," he cried. But his brother wouldn't meet his eyes. With muddy, shaking hands, I gathered what little we had: a worn shawl, 2 changes of clothes, an old photograph of Thomas. That was all. I tied them into a small bundle and stepped toward the door. The sun was setting, but its warmth did nothing to ease the chill in my bones. As the door closed behind us, I felt a silence deeper than death itself. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some whispering, some turning away. I felt their eyes like stones on my back. Humiliation burned through me hotter than the Mississippi. Summer air, there I was, a mother, cast out not by strangers, not by enemies, but by my own flesh and blood. The boy I once rocked to sleep, the boy I sacrificed for, had turned me into an outcast in my own home. As Michael and I stepped into the street with our bundle of clothes, my heart broke in a way I didn't know it could. A part of me died on that porch, and the woman who walked away that evening was not the same one who had walked in that morning. After Richard's betrayal, I refused to believe that this was the end. Somewhere deep inside, I still held on to one last hope. Thomas, my husband, my partner. If I could just find him, maybe he would set things right. So with Michael's small hand tucked tightly into mine, we boarded a crowded bus heading north to Chicago. I remember staring out the window as the fields of Mississippi faded into highways, and then into the endless sprawl of the city. My heart pounded with a single thought: if I can find Thomas, everything will be okay. But Chicago was not Greenville. The air smelled of smoke and steel. The streets buzzed with strangers who never looked you in the eye. Factories stood tall, their chimneys coughing black into the sky. I walked from one to the next, asking anyone who would listen. Have you seen a man named Thomas Miller? About 6 feet, dark hair, kind eyes. He worked here, maybe. Some shook their heads without a word. Others muttered, "Too many men come and go. Can't remember them all." I tried the diners, standing at the counter with Michael beside me, the smell of grease clinging to my clothes. I asked waitresses if they'd seen him. I asked church pastors, holding back tears as I lit candles and whispered prayers under my breath. But every door closed. Every answer was the same. No trace. No one knows him. Nights were the hardest. Michael and I shared a single thin blanket, in small, cheap rooms that smelled of dampness and loneliness. I would lie awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to my boy's soft breathing. Tears would slip silently down my cheeks as I prayed, "Please, Lord, just one glimpse of him, one sign, one chance to tell him what's happened." But morning always came empty. Chicago swallowed my hope piece by piece. Each factory gate I left behind, each alley I walked through, each church pew I sat in, all of them echoed the same painful truth. Thomas was nowhere to be found. And slowly, I realized I couldn't keep searching forever. My son needed food, not just prayers. He needed shelter, not just promises. So with a heart heavier than my bundle of clothes, I turned away from Chicago's endless streets and headed back south. Not to Greenville, that door was closed, but to St. Louis, where I thought maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to survive. By the time I left Chicago, the city had drained me of more than money. It had taken my last drops of hope. With no sign of Thomas, no familiar face to turn to, I boarded another bus with Michael and headed to St. Louis. I remember staring out, the window, my reflection looking back at me in the glass. A woman who had aged years in just a few weeks. My heart felt like a stone. For the first time, I whispered to myself, maybe he's gone for good. Maybe I'll never see him again. Iana. St. Louis, life became about survival. I scrubbed floors in other people's houses until my knees ached and my hands cracked from the soap. I washed dishes in restaurants, the steam burning my face, the sound of clattering plates filling my ears long after my shift ended. Sometimes I looked after other women's children, rocking them to sleep while my own son waited quietly in the corner, too grown up for his age, too patient for his years. Each night I came home with just enough money for bread, maybe a bit of stew meat if it was a good week. And every night, Michael would take my face in his small hands and whisper, "Don't cry, Mama. We'll be fine. We have each other." Those words cut deeper than any wound. He was only a child, yet he carried himself like my protector. He deserved a childhood filled with laughter and games, not the weight of comforting his broken mother. I would smile through my tears and tell him, "You're right, baby. We'll be fine." But inside, I wondered how long I could keep us afloat, how long I could keep pretending I was strong. It was in those dim rooms of St. Louis, with the smell of soap still on my hands and the sound of my son's steady breathing beside me, that I began to realize, if we were going to survive, it would not be because someone saved us. It would be because I found a way to save us myself. Life in St. Louis was not easy, but I learned to stretch every penny, tucking away just a little at the end of each week. It wasn't much, a few coins at first, but I hid them carefully in an old tin box under my bed. That box became my secret weapon, my symbol of hope. One evening, after another long day of scrubbing floors, I sat with Michael and said, "Baby, I think it's time we try something of our own." He looked at me with those wide, trusting eyes and nodded. He didn't even need to ask what I meant. With those saved coins, I bought a small cart, second-hand and rusty. I borrowed a pot from a kind neighbor and filled it with stew the way my mother once taught me. The smell of onions, garlic, and slow-cooked meat drifted through our little room that night. For the first time in a long while, my heart beat not with despair, but with nervous excitement. The next morning, Michael and I pushed that cart to the corner of a busy street. I remember standing there, my hands trembling as strangers passed, by without even a glance. My heart whispered, "What if no one buys? What if they laugh?" Then an older man stopped. He sniffed the air, smiled, and handed me a coin. "Smells like home," he said. I ladled stew into a bowl, my hands still shaking, and gave it to him. He took one bite, closed his eyes, and nodded. That single nod was worth more than all the coins in the world. By midday, a few more customers came, some curious, some hungry. Each bowl I served felt like a piece of my soul, and when I counted the coins that evening, my fingers trembled again, not from fear this time, but from pride. It wasn't much money, barely enough to cover the ingredients for the next day. But it was ours, not charity, not someone else's leftovers, ours. That night, Michael hugged me tight and said, "Mama, we did it. You did it." And for the first time since Richard had thrown me out, I allowed myself to believe, maybe, just maybe, we could build something from nothing. One day turned into another, and before I knew it, that little food cart became my lifeline. Every morning, I woke before dawn to chop vegetables, stir the pot, and pack up the cart with Michael by my side. He would push from one end, I from the other, and together we'd wheel it to the same corner where our journey began. At first, customers trickled in, a factory worker on his way to the early shift, a school teacher too tired to cook at night, a mother with children clinging to her skirt. But slowly word began to spread. People started saying, "Have you tried Mama Maggie's stew? Tastes just like home." That nickname, Mama Maggie, caught on faster than I ever expected. Strangers began to greet me by it, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a woman abandoned, not as a mother betrayed, but as someone who mattered. With each passing month, the coins in my tin box grew heavier. When I had enough, I bought a proper stall, a small wooden stand with a bright red awning. It wasn't fancy, but it meant people didn't just stumble upon me. They came looking for me. The stall became a gathering place. I learned my customers' names, their favorite dishes, their stories. Some brought their children, who played near Michael while I ladled stew. Some stopped just to talk, telling me how my food reminded them of their mothers, their grandmothers, their childhood homes. In feeding them, I realized I was feeding myself too, filling the empty spaces in my heart with connection, with purpose. Michael worked harder than any boy his age should have. He wiped tables, carried crates, shouted, "Best stew in St. Louis," with a grin that made passers-by smile. He was my strength, my partner, the reason I never gave up. When my arms ached, he would take the spoon from me and stir. When my spirit faltered, he would whisper, "Mama, look how far we've come." Years passed this way, each one building upon the last, from a cart to a stall, and then, by some miracle, to a small restaurant. The day I unlocked the door to that little brick building with my own key, I cried, not because of the walls or the tables inside, but because it was proof that pain doesn't have to be the end of your story. Proof that betrayal can break you, or it can build you if you choose to rise. And me? I chose to rise. While I was busy in St. Louis building my life from scraps, far away in Greenville, another story was unfolding. The story of Thomas, my husband. Years had passed since he first left for Chicago. The work had aged him, long shifts in factories, heavy labor that bent his back and carved new lines into his face. But through it all, he held on to one hope, that when he finally returned home, he would walk into his farmhouse and see me standing in the doorway, our boys at my side. The day he came back, he carried a worn suitcase in one hand and the same old watch ticking faithfully on his wrist. His heart was light with expectation. But when he opened the door to that familiar house, it was not me he found. It was Richard. Thomas embraced him, his voice breaking with emotion. "Where's your mother? Where's Michael? I've missed them every day." And in that moment, Richard delivered the lie that would scar us for years. His face was blank as he said, "They're gone, Dad. One day, Mama left with Michael. Walked out the door and never came back. We looked everywhere, but..." It was like they vanished. Thomas staggered back, his heart pounding. "Gone? No. Margaret would never..." But Richard held firm, repeating the story Pamela had likely rehearsed with him, word for word. My husband's hope shattered. He searched Greenville, asking neighbors, wandering the roads, checking the church pews. Each time he asked, the pitying looks cut him deeper. Some shook their heads, some whispered, "It's a shame, a real shame," but no one had answers. And every night he returned to that empty farmhouse, his chest heavy with grief, convinced that I had chosen to leave him, that the woman he loved had walked away without a word. Loneliness became his shadow. He carried that ache for years, never knowing the truth, that while he wept in Greenville, I was in St. Louis weeping for him. Two hearts broken, both searching, both lost to the lies of the son we trusted. It was an ordinary afternoon in Kansas City, or so I thought. The restaurant was humming with the usual noise, the clatter of dishes, the low murmur of conversations, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the air. I was moving between tables, checking on customers, when the door creaked open. A man walked in. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. He was older, his shoulders bent slightly from years of hard work, his hair streaked with gray. He wore a plain jacket and carried himself quietly, like someone used to being overlooked. But when I glanced at his face, something inside me stirred. A flicker of recognition, like a half-forgotten dream rising to the surface. He sat at a corner table and ordered a simple plate, stew and bread, the dish I had perfected through years of tears and toil. I watched from behind the counter as he lifted the spoon, slowly, almost reverently, and took the first bite. The moment the flavor touched his tongue, I saw it. His hand paused, his eyes closed, and he whispered under his breath, "Just like my wife's cooking." My heart froze. My chest ached with 1,000 memories all at once. I knew that voice. I knew that face, even aged and weathered. It was Thomas. My Thomas. But he didn't see me. His eyes never lifted from the bowl. He finished the meal quietly, as though lost in another time, another place. And then, just as calmly, he reached into his pocket, laid some bills on the table, and stood to leave. I wanted to shout his name, to run into his arms. But my feet stayed rooted to the ground. My breath caught in my throat. After all these years, after all the searching, after all the nights I thought I'd never see him again, he was here. And yet, he walked out the door without knowing. It was me. The door closed behind him, the bell above it jingling lightly, and I felt as though my entire world had slipped through my fingers again. I was still standing frozen behind the counter, my heart pounding, when one of my waiters approached. In his hand was something small, something shining faintly under the light. "Ma'am," he said, "that gentleman left this on the table. Looked too valuable to forget." I reached out, my fingers trembling before they even touched it. And then, the moment I saw it clearly, the breath left my body. It was a watch, not just any watch, his watch, the very one I had saved for months to buy, wrapping it in brown paper with shaking hands on the day of his birthday so many years ago. I remembered the way his eyes had lit up when he first put it on, the way he kissed my forehead and said, "I'll wear this till my last day." And here it was. After all these years, the room around me blurred. My knees felt weak. My hands clutched the watch so tightly I could feel the cool metal pressing into my skin. Tears welled up and spilled over before I could stop them. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice breaking. Without another thought, I dropped the cloth I had been holding, pushed past the tables, and ran out into the street. My heart was racing faster than my feet, pounding with one desperate hope, that I wasn't too late, that I could still catch him before he vanished again. The city noises faded into nothing. The honking of cars, the chatter of people, even the clinking of dishes behind me. All I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears, the cry of my soul. For years I had dreamed of this moment. And now, holding that watch against my chest, I knew the truth. I had finally found him. The name tore from my throat before I even knew I was speaking. It wasn't just a word. It was a cry pulled from every year of longing, every night of tears, every prayer I had whispered into the dark. He was halfway down the street, moving, slowly, shoulders bent under the weight of time. At the sound of his name, he stopped. His body stiffened. Then, slowly, he turned. Our eyes met. For a moment, the world stood still. The cars, the voices, the city, all of it faded until there was nothing but me and him. His eyes widened, searching my face as if he couldn't trust what he was seeing. "Margaret?" His voice cracked, trembling, like a man seeing a ghost. "Yes, Thomas, it's me." I clutched the watch to my chest and began to run. And then he was running too, closing the distance between us until finally, after all these years, I was in his arms again. The embrace was fierce, desperate, almost painful. His hands shook as they gripped my shoulders, my back, my face, as if making sure I was real. My tears soaked his jacket, and I felt his own drop warm against my hair. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Richard told me. He told me you left, that you walked away with Michael." "I searched, Maggie. I swear I searched." I pulled back just enough to look at him, my hands cupping his weathered face. "No, Thomas, I never left you. He threw me out. He lied to us both. I begged for you, I searched for you, but I could never find you." His eyes closed, his face crumpling with pain. All those years, all that time wasted. "But we're here now," I said, choking back sobs. "God gave us back this moment. That's enough." He pressed his forehead to mine, holding me, as though letting go again would kill him. In that moment, the years melted away. We weren't two broken people anymore. We were husband and wife, bound by something stronger than time, stronger than lies. And there, in the middle of a busy Kansas, city street, two old souls clung to each other like they were young again, their hearts beating not in despair, but in reunion. When the first rush of tears eased, Thomas and I found a quiet bench by the corner. He held my hand as though he feared I might vanish again, and I could see the questions burning in his eyes. "Margaret," he said, his voice low, strained, "tell me everything. What really happened?" And so I did. I told him how Richard had first claimed the money stopped coming, how Pamela whispered poison into his ear day and night, how one morning my own son stood before me, cold and hard, and ordered me and Michael out of our home. I told him of the nights we wandered hungry, of my desperate journey to Chicago, searching every factory, every diner, begging for a trace of him. How I returned to St. Louis with nothing but my boy's small hands in mine, and how we scraped a life together, one bowl of stew at a time. With every word, I felt Thomas's grip tighten. His face went pale, his jaw set like stone. That boy. His voice shook with fury. My own son lied to me, lied about you, about Michael. He stole from us, tore this family apart. He lowered his head, and for a moment I thought I saw his shoulders tremble. And all this time, I thought you had abandoned me. I cursed myself for believing it, but Margaret, it broke me. I laid my hand against his cheek, forcing him to look at me. You were deceived, Thomas, just like I was. But we are here now, and we still have a chance to put things right. He drew in a sharp breath and nodded slowly, as though finding strength in my words. You're right. We've lost too many years already. No more. It's time we take back what belongs to us. It's time Richard and that woman face the truth. For the first time in decades, I saw the fire return to his eyes. Not the weariness of a man beaten down by life, but the determination of the husband I once knew. And in that moment, sitting side by side on a city bench, we made a silent vow. Together, we would reclaim what was lost, our home, our dignity, and the years that had been stolen from us. The very next morning, Thomas and I walked together into a law office in downtown Kansas City. My hands were trembling as we climbed the stone steps, but Thomas's grip on mine was steady. For years we had been scattered, broken, deceived. But now, for the first time, we were united with purpose. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with sharp glasses and a voice that carried authority, listened as we laid out the story. He nodded slowly, scribbling notes, occasionally glancing up with a look that was part sympathy, part disbelief. When Thomas pulled out the old metal box he had carried with him, filled with papers he had guarded through the years, the lawyer spread them across the desk. Property deeds, proof of ownership, records that tied the farmhouse and the land back to Thomas and me. He adjusted his glasses, tapped the papers with his pen, and said firmly, Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller, this property is yours. No matter what your son has claimed, he had no right to put you out. And now we'll make that clear. Hearing those words, I felt something swell in my chest. Not anger, not even triumph, but a quiet kind of justice I had thought would never come. The lawyer leaned forward, his tone crisp. We'll send him a formal notice, a demand to vacate. If he refuses, we'll take him to court. And believe me, the law will not be on his side. Thomas and I exchanged a glance. There was no hesitation, no fear. For too long, Richard had held our lives in his hands. Now, it was time to take them back. When the lawyer sealed the envelope with our names signed at the bottom, I felt a chill of finality run through me. This was not just paper. This was the beginning of justice, and somewhere miles away, I knew Richard's world was about to crack wide open. By the time the lawyer's notice reached Richard, his life was already unraveling. His once proud business, the very thing Pamela had pushed him to build, the very thing he had chosen over his own blood, was crumbling. Deals had fallen. Through, debts were mounting, and whispers spread in Greenville that Richard Miller was no longer the man he pretended to be. Pamela's sharp tongue, once so full of confidence, had turned bitter. Neighbors said they could hear their arguments, spilling out into the street. And as his business collapsed around him, Richard clung to the farmhouse like a drowning man to a piece of wood. It was the only thing he had left. Then the letter arrived, a thick envelope stamped with a lawyer's seal. He tore it open with shaking hands and read the words that sealed his fate. Vacate the property immediately. Legal action will follow. His face went pale. His hands trembled. For years, he had believed his lies were safe, buried in the past. But here it was, the past, knocking on his door with the weight of the law behind it. For the first time in his life, Richard couldn't hide behind pride or Pamela or his false stories. He had only one choice left, and so, with his shoulders hunched and shame heavy on his face, he came to us. I will never forget that moment, seeing my eldest son, the boy who once betrayed me, standing at the doorway of my restaurant. His eyes were red, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Mama, Dad, please. I've lost everything. Don't take the house. Don't turn me out. I'm begging you." There was no arrogance left in him, no defiance, just desperation. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew that desperation alone was not enough to erase the years of cruelty, the lies, the pain he had caused. Richard stood before us, his face pale, his pride in pieces. For the first time in years, I saw not the arrogant man Pamela had shaped, but the frightened boy I once held in my arms. His voice cracked as he pleaded, "Mama, Dad, I was wrong. I see it now. Please don't take everything from me. Please forgive me." I stared at him, my heart torn between the mother who had loved him and the woman who had been betrayed by him. My hands trembled, but my voice came out cold, steady, unshaken. "Richard," I said, locking eyes with him, "you let that woman poison your heart. You chose her lies over your own blood. You left me and your brother on the street. You let your father believe I had abandoned him. Do you think words alone can erase that?" He dropped his gaze, silent. I stepped closer, my voice rising with years of pain. "If you want forgiveness, if you want to be my son again, there is only one way. You must cut her out of your life. Divorce that poisonous woman, Pamela. Until then, there is no forgiveness. None." His head shot up, his eyes wide, stunned. "Mama, you can't ask me to—" "I can," I said firmly, and I just did. Thomas's hand rested on my shoulder, his silence echoing his agreement. Richard's lips trembled. His chest heaved with shame and disbelief. For the first time, he realized the power was no longer in his hands. The mother he thought he had, destroyed now, stood taller than ever, unbending, unafraid. He had come expecting mercy. Instead, he found a wall of justice. And as he stood there, broken and speechless, I knew this moment was my revenge. Not through anger, not through violence, but through the one thing he could never take from me, my strength. Today, when people walk into my restaurant, they see a woman who has it all together. They see Mama Maggie greeting customers with a smile, serving meals that warm both stomach and soul. They see success. What they don't see is the road that brought me here, the betrayal of a son, the lies that separated me from my husband, the nights of hunger, the tears I thought would never end. They don't see the scrubbing, the begging, the cart I push through the streets just to survive. But I see it. I carry it with me every single day. Not as a burden, but as a reminder of what I overcame. I am 57 years old. I was thrown out, abandoned, lied to, broken down. And still, I rose. So if you are listening to my story today, wondering if your life can ever be rebuilt, hear me clearly. If I could rebuild mine at 57, then you can too. Age does not matter. Betrayal does not define you. Pain is not the end. It can be the beginning. Yes, my story is filled with wounds, but it is also filled with victories. Victories that came not because I was spared from suffering, but because I refused to let suffering be the final chapter of my life. So remember, this, my friend, never let betrayal be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning of your strength. Before I end, let me ask you something. When I stood before Richard and told him, "If you want forgiveness, you must divorce Pamela," what would you have done if you were in his place? Would you have chosen your mother, the woman who gave, You life, or the wife who poisoned your heart against her? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what choice you would have made, and don't forget to subscribe. Because stories like mine aren't just stories, they're lessons we all can learn from.